The Sony ZV-E1 was built for low light situations. This shot, for example, is at 20,000 ISO, and look how good this looks. In this video, I'm going to show you every single one of the ISO values in this camera. Test it out. You can see for yourself how much noise it is or isn't producing. In addition to that, I'm going to show you what's working really well for me right now to get my low light videos to look excellent using this camera. At any point throughout this video, if your mind is blown, you want to give me some love, give it a tap on the thumbs up. On to the tests. For the ISO test, I'm going to be in the picture profile of S-Cinetone, which is likely a really popular one. I'm going to be exposing the meters for every single ISO to 0.0. And I won't be doing anything to the footage in post, that way you can get a really raw look. Okay, so as we get into this ISO test here, and you can see the actual noise levels on every single ISO level out of the ZV-E1, I've actually already looked at it. It's really interesting. I'm going to play some tracks, my favorite track from audio.com. If you need copyright-free music or sound effects for your videos, you have to check out Audio. They're my go-to. I absolutely love them. So if you're enjoying the track, that's where it came from. So what I have on screen here is all the ISO levels. We're going to go through these on the left. And I've zoomed into 200% of one of these panels. It's directly behind that. So you can see what it looks like zoomed in. You can see the noise levels appearing on these black sound panels. But keep in mind, it's a heavy zoom in on that, and make sure you contrast that to what the actual frame looks like. But let's take a look at how this goes. ISO 100, this is the first base ISO for S-Cinetone. No noise in that really much at all. And we're slowly moving up to 125 here, 160. You'll start to slowly see some noise get introduced, mainly focus on that zoomed in panel here. Starting to notice a little bit, but these are all really clean. I'm really not concerned about these low level ISOs here whatsoever, completely usable. As we get into 640, we start to notice a little bit of those noise levels. Again, pay close attention to these panels here. 1000 starting to show up. 1600, that's the highest before 2000, which is our second baseline ISO. I'm going to play that again. I want you guys to see what just happened there. Notice at 2000 the level of noise that really isn't there. If I'm going to scroll back here to 1600, and we'll go back to 1250 just to get this to play through. Watch what happens at 2000. So 1600, pay attention to the ISO, 2000 watch. And that's the second baseline ISO where it actually shuts off the ISO, and that's that algorithm's kicking in. There's a little bit of a delay, and I'll do it one more time. There's a bit of a delay, so watch when we kick over from 1600 to 2000. So watch this, 1600, watch 2000, and then watch what happens. And that baseline, second baseline kicks in. Now we start to move in to these higher ISOs, but we reset our ISO level at 2000 back to that original, how the ISO was performing with noise at 100. So we're slowly introducing some noise here. That's just the value of that second, quote unquote, second native baseline ISO. Getting into some high levels here, we're certainly introducing some noise, but again, pay attention to the panels on the left side of the screen too, not just the zoom in, because that zoom in is zoomed in, and what's on the left, the non-zoomed in, is the practical use of what you're going to see in your frame without any zoom. And now we're getting into some muddy waters here for sure as we start to get up here. And what you're going to notice right there, the frame is going to get brighter because I had this in aperture priority and we ran out of shutter speed to get the metering to stay exposed to 0. So the frame's getting a little bit brighter. I do go back in just like a few seconds here. I go back and change the aperture so you can see what's actually going on with the ISO at high levels and the exposure on the meters being at 0. So we capped out there, and now I'm going to go back. I just changed the f-stop. You can see that in the bottom of the screen to get my meters to be at 0. So that's what 102,400 looks like exposed to 0 on the meters. At 80,000, same thing. I pull the aperture a little bit, and then you can see the noise levels there. 6,400, same thing, giving you guys a real look at what these look like when they're exposed to 0. I went to focus there for no good reason. 51,200, and we can see what that looks like. Getting a little bit muddy, to say the least. I'm gonna actually pause right there for a second. Getting muddy, to say the least, and when you start to look at the regular frame here, starting to lose some sharpness on certain objects that are there, and we're starting to see that noise really introduced. But to be honest, the color cast really isn't that prevalent. There's no skin tone here, so that's certainly a factor, but that blue and that orange, that's pretty much how they look at lower ISOs. Granted, the contrast here is certainly less, which you should, to be expected with something like this, but overall, that's pretty impressive. We'll let this thing just kind of play out the last few seconds here on that 51,200 so you guys can see that. That's gonna wrap up the ISO test. Okay, getting into the guide section of this video, I'm gonna show you all of the best practices, at least what's working well for me, to get my videos looking exceptional at high ISOs in low light situations out of this brand new Sony ZV-E1. And the first thing we're going to talk about with that is choosing the right ISO. Generally speaking, when you increase the ISO on the camera, you're going to start to introduce noise into your video footage and your photos, kind of the same thing here. And when we say a camera has really good low light performance, what we mean is that the image looks good, meaning that it's sharp and it's not getting any crazy color casting, even at those high ISOs. I believe the ZV-E1 performs extremely well at high ISOs. Let's take a look at how to choose the best ISO. So the lower the ISO, the better. The ZV-E1 has a sneaky little feature in it where the lowest ISO of picture profile is going to be the best noise performance. It has a point where we hit a certain ISO, and it's different for every picture profile, where that noise performance is going to be the same as the baseline, which resembles something that's called dual native bass ISO. It's not truly that, but there's some algorithms working that are reducing the noise once we get to a certain point to reset the noise levels, and then as we increase from that second bass ISO, noise slowly starts to get introduced. And like I mentioned, every picture profile, those numbers, those ISO values are going to be a little bit different in terms of the baseline and that second native baseline. Sounds complicated? Don't worry, I've got your back. Link below, you can download a free chart. You see it up on screen now, and that did all the work for you. It's going to show every picture profile's baseline ISO and what that second native baseline ISO is. And that's not to say that this camera doesn't perform well at ISOs that aren't those two baselines. It actually performs extremely well, like that intro shot we looked at, for example, earlier today. In S-Log3, that shot was not at that second baseline ISO. It was much higher than that. But regardless, the camera is going to give you the cleanest footage at those two ISO values, depending on what picture profile you're in. But again, it performs very well at different ISOs as well. Next, let's review the actual video settings that we want to be using. Simple one here, 4K is going to look better in low light than 1080p. So choose 4K when you're in low light situations. And if you're trying to decide which of these codecs do I want to use between XAVC-S, XAVC-HS, and XAVC-SI, I haven't noticed any major differences between these, but you'll absolutely want to use 10-bit color as opposed to that 8-bit to preserve as much color as possible at higher ISOs. Or just because 10-bit is literally better for everything that we do with this camera instead of 8-bit. The last setting we're going to talk about is exposure. 90% of what it takes to get a good looking video in general, but especially in low light, comes down to nailing your exposure. I use a method called zebras. It works extremely well for me. I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. I'm going to show you how to get your zebras turned on and how to set the levels in your ZV-E1. I'm over here on the fourth menu tab, the purple one, and down here under zebra display, these two settings. Zebra display, you can turn these on, and then your zebra levels will be here. We'll come back to those levels in just 1 second. One thing that you can do if you want to save some time and match how I've done things here, under dial customize on this last tab, this briefcase, dial customize video key dial settings. All the way up top, here's where I have mapped mine. That center button, that allows me, those settings we just looked at, when I click it, it'll either turn my zebras on, click it again, it'll turn them off, and then my zebra levels is pushing left on my wheel. How that looks here, if I just tap that center button, I am toggling my zebra displays on or off. Tap left and I can set the levels of the values that zebras will be showing up. This is the Ansel Adams exposure chart. It shows what values to expose things to. The good news is that the zebra levels in your camera match this chart perfectly. And I'm gonna link, again, that chart if you want it for free. Links down below, you can check that out. This chart's a bit complicated, so let's simplify it a bit and only use this skin tones section here and these highlights, as those are things that are gonna be prevalent in 99% of the shots that we're doing, especially the ones in low light. So for example, let's say that we have my skin tone in the shot. I'd set the zebra levels to 70, and then I'd start to bring the ISO up until the zebras start to appear on my skin, then pull back by 1 click, and that will be my exposure. For different skin tones, it's the exact same things, but you'll change your zebra setting to match the chart. And if I have a shot that doesn't happen to have a skin tone in it, I'll find a light in the scene which per the chart will need to be exposed to 100. So I'll set my zebra levels to 100, bring the ISO up until the zebras start to appear on that brightest part of that light or highlight. then pull back by 1 click, and that will be our exposure for that scene. I use that exact same method regardless of what picture profile that I'm in, and I found it to be really consistent and extremely simple. You know what we didn't talk about in this video? Other video settings to get the most out of your brand new Sony ZVE1. Good news again, got your back. Check out this video where I deep dive into just that. I have a lot more videos planned for the ZVE1. Subscribe down below if you don't want to miss them. I'll see you in the next one.